Opening the center's diagonal, this pawn advances, immediately contesting central territory and creating options for piece development. Developing the knight to a central square immediately contests white's central pawn. Establishing central space and preparing to challenge black's knight's control is the immediate goal. Black solidifies central influence and prepares for piece development, a sensible step in this Kings-Indian setup. Developing the knight here bolsters the center and prepares for a kingside expansion, all while maintaining flexibility for future piece play. Embracing the center, this gambit immediately challenges white's central control and opens lines for active piece play. Protecting the knight and continuing central development, preparing to contest black's daring pawn thrust. Solidifying the center and preparing for potential pawn pushes like c5 or e5, this knight maneuver quietly anchors the kingside. Unleashing a fianchetto aims to stabilize the center and prepare a long-range bishop's influence, subtly reinforcing the queenside structure against future pawn thrusts. Solidifying the fianchetto structure, this move prepares for a kingside castling while subtly eyeing the d4 pawn's central influence. Developing the bishop to this diagonal immediately aims to control the long dark-squared diagonal and prepares castling, solidifying white's kingside pawn structure. The fianchettoed bishop now eyes the long diagonal, bolstering the kingside and preparing for central pawn breaks. Securing the monarch is paramount before initiating any ambitious central maneuvers, ensuring a safe haven. Casting the king secures the monarch and prepares for central pawn advances. Solidifying the center, white boldly claims space, potentially opening lines for rapid development and an aggressive kingside assault. Preparing to activate the king's rook to potentially challenge the central pawn structure, a subtle piece repositioning. Instantly locking down central space, white aims to restrict black's pieces and prepare a queenside expansion. Knight maneuvering to c5 immediately contests the d3 square and prepares for potential central breaks. Reorienting the knight from f3 to e1 opens the f-file for potential pawn advances and prepares for central maneuvering. Expanding on the queenside, black seeks counterplay and to disrupt white's control of the center. Reinforcing the kingside pawn structure prevents any immediate breakthroughs for black's knight. Recentering the rook on a less active square seems counterproductive to challenging the central pawn mass. Fortifying the center and preparing for a pawn push, b3 subtly aims to reroute the knight and increase pressure on black's kingside. A fascinating repositioning, rerouting the knight to the kingside, potentially preparing for a kingside advance or reinforcing the central pawn structure. A daring repositioning, seeking to unlock the kingside while potentially cramping black's queenside ambitions. Seeking to expand its queenside presence, this maneuver aims to free the c8 bishop and challenge white's central control. Preparing to shift queen support, potentially activating the kingside attack or reinforcing the center's advance. Initiating a flank pawn thrust, black aims to disrupt white's kingside control and gain attacking momentum on the queenside. Shattering the central pawn chain now opens lines for aggressive piece play. Opening the g-file drastically alters the kingside dynamics, creating immediate attacking possibilities. Unleashing the f-file, white aims to shatter black's pawn shield and exploit the open lines towards the monarch. Initiating a central pawn exchange to dismantle the opponent's pawn chain, potentially opening lines for active piece play. Unlocking the d-file for the queen creates immediate pressure and forces black to confront the opened lines. Opening up lines is a double-edged sword, potentially exposing your king. Reassessing the queenside pressure, white repositions the queen to prepare for potential pawn advances or to support a central breakthrough. Reclaiming the initiative, black's queen eyes central weaknesses and prepares to challenge white's imposing pawn chain. Rerouting the rook offers flexibility, preparing to contest the f-file and potentially exploit any weaknesses around black's king. Developing the bishop to this square subtly aims to increase queenside pressure and contest the semi-open c-file. Targeting the open e-file creates immediate central pressure and aims to dislodge black's advanced pawn. Black ignites central fireworks, challenging the pawn chain and preparing to exploit the open files. Shifting the knight to a more active square, preparing to exploit the e4 pawn's overextension and potentially generate threats along the central files. Reasserting pressure on the center, this knight repositions to menace white's central pawn structure and prepare for potential pawn thrusts. Initiating a fight for the central e-file, this piece aims to disrupt black's pawn structure and prepare for further advances. Unblocking the c8 bishop, this redeployment aims to activate the queen and support pawn advances, creating active possibilities on the queen side. Recentering the queen creates a flexible battery aiming towards black's king, preparing for potential pawn pushes. This retreat opens up the f-file for attack and prepares to contest the weakened king side. Centralizing the knight revitalizes white's position, aiming to exploit the open d-file and create attacking chances on the queen side. This strategic repositioning aims to reinforce the king side and potentially support a king side pawn advance, while offering increased flexibility for future operations. Repositioning the bishop seeks to enhance control over the long diagonal and prepare for potential pawn advances. Seeking safer pastures, the king sidesteps potential diagonal threats and prepares to join the queenside pawn struggle. Aiding the rook's access to the open files, this bishop repositions to bolster the pawn chain's defense. Initiating a pawn storm on the king side, aiming to dismantle white's pawn shield and create attacking chances. Preparing to double rooks on the g-file, aiming to pry open lines toward black's king. Repositioning the bishop opens a diagonal, potentially creating imbalances and pressuring white's central pawns. Reinforcing the kingside defense, this rook maneuver prepares for potential pawn advances or even a future retreat if the center opens. A bold attempt to generate counterplay on the kingside, injecting much-needed dynamism into a somewhat static position. Reinforcing the kingside defense, this maneuver aims to bolster the monarchy and prepare for potential future advances. Shifting the bishop to the kingside adds defensive reinforcement, though it surrenders central control for a potentially passive posture. Solidifying the queenside pawn structure, this creates a more robust defensive perimeter against black's potential kingside advances. Unleashing pawn storms, a gamble that rips open the kingside for potential chaos. Opening the kingside with this capture, white initiates a dangerous pawn storm, seeking to exploit black's exposed monarch. The queen bravely ventures forward, probing the weakened kingside shadows created by the pawn exchange. Unleashing the g-file offers a sharp assault, forcing black's king into a precarious, exposed position. Unleashing the queen into the enemy camp, black seeks immediate counterplay and targets the weakened kingside. Repositioning the rook aggressively, aiming to exploit the open king's flank where black's pawn structure has become porous. Securing the bishop's retreat allows it to redeploy, potentially to a more active diagonal or for defense. Exploiting the open file, white's rook crashes into the enemy position, threatening a swift checkmate. Re-establishing bishop's influence on the kingside diagonal offers renewed attacking chances. Recapturing the pawn initiates a fascinating positional struggle, aiming to exploit black's slightly exposed king. Sacrificing the bishop opens lines, but exposing your king dramatically is a severe positional gamble. Opening the f-file creates immediate attacking possibilities against the weakened black king. A daring sortie, the knight seeks active squares but opens its own king to potential threats. Clearing the bishop from that awkward pin opens the g-file for a decisive assault on black's exposed monarch. The immediate king exposure from this capture leaves the black monarch dangerously exposed. The monarch's exposed position becomes a primary target as white's queen pierces the weakened kingside defenses. Fleeing the king's exposed position, this retreat sacrifices material to prevent immediate disaster. Capturing the queen decisively ends the tactical skirmish and consolidates white's material advantage. Unleashing the rook's power on the third rank, this counter-sacrifice aims to disrupt white's king's safety and potentially create counterplay. Unleashing a mating net around the enemy king, the king's desperate flight is now a trap. The black king's exposed position now offers white a clear path to a swift checkmate, exploiting the open lines. Unleashing a decisive check that hunts the enemy king across the board. Exposing the king to further checks after this pursuit invites immediate tactical complications, potentially leading to a swift conclusion. Unleashing a devastating discovered check, white forces the black king into a mating net. Seeking refuge, the king flirts with disaster, leaving its kingdom exposed. The queen reclaims open files, threatening discovered checks and exploiting the exposed black king. Sacrificing the rook offers a temporary reprieve, but abandons any hope of defending the king's exposed position. Securing the king with this capture initiates the endgame transition, aiming to exploit the exposed black monarch. Initiating a final mating sequence, forcing the white king into a cornered position. Securing the king's escape route while keeping options open for further king hunts. Unleashing a checkmate threat, black forces the white king into a perilous position, opening lines for further attack. Seeking refuge for the monarch amid the storm, king centralization often proves a decisive endgame strategy. A desperate check, seeking a perpetual draw rather than facing the inevitable checkmate. Focusing on securing the king, white redirects their bishop to a more defensive posture, anticipating potential checks. This maneuver seeks to achieve perpetual check by forcing the opposing king into a checking sequence. Recapturing the knight opens a clear path for the queen to deliver a swift checkmating attack. The king's escape route is now wide open, inviting further complications. King's safety is now paramount as this pawn check aims to break the black king's shield and expose it to further attacks.